Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of us approach midlife, we find that we're pursuing successes that sometimes for a lot of us may seem a little bit elusive, but we try to do the best we can to be sure that it happens. And then there are those of us who are highly driven that seem to have things working out for us because we make sure that the image in mind or the desire that we have in forehand is something that we decide we're going to pursue no matter what. On the program today, we're going to be talking about something that probably a few of us believe we may have, and that is the idea that we can control situations that seemingly seem to be beyond our control. On the program today, we're going to be talking with a guest who graduated from UCLA with honors in business administration and finished in the top 5% of his class. Oh, that sounds like an ideal. Opened up a law practice and also did seminars for thousands of people on how to invest in real estate. He's joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today to talk about his new book, Losing Control, Finding Serenity, How the Need to Control Hurts Us and How to Let It Go. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mr. Danny Miller. Danny, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
My pleasure, Dan. It's great
now,
to see you.
You know, you go into this book and you take a look at what you had, and you think, why not be in control? You know, but then all of a sudden, things just kind of started slipping away as though life says, okay, I've given you what you wanted for the most part, and I think maybe it's time to turn a corner and learn some new lessons. Tell us about your story.
Sure. Well, Daniel, I was an obsessive controller, a type A personality, which I guess I still am, but I really was driven to achieve success, good grades, the best I could do. And, you know, over a period of years, I did. At my mid-30s, I was, I guess, objectively successful in that I had material wealth. I had accomplished quite a bit, some of the things you mentioned. And I was always driving and through different control ways because that was the way I thought was best. That's the way I thought that worked best for me. Until I hit major roadblocks, some major crises in my life. And as a controller, the inclination is when that happens, you control even more because your fears surface even in greater amounts. And fear is really the primary catalyst for controlling action. So I kept going, I kept fighting, I kept resisting, I kept trying to do as a series of pretty traumatic events. Arsonist set fire to our home, near bankruptcy, divorce, had a dangerous neighbor, a lot of different things. But my wake-up call, my final wake-up call really was a wake-up call. And I just remember being in this cold room, white walls, very sterile, and as my vision became clearer, I saw bodies around me and heard a voice saying, Danny, we need your permission before we can go further. And this was a Dr. Kiryanov asking me that coming out of was supposed to have been a 20-minute surgical procedure. I was under for 5 hours. They didn't give me permission. I had skin cancer in my nose that was really bad. Mm-hmm. Anyways, I went through a series of 5 major surgeries over about a 2-year period, and at that point, having even a controller like me had to take some cognizance of what was going on, and at that, because of all the financial pressures and everything else, I was compelled to surrender. You know, I had no choice. It was no way to go on fighting the latest demons and dragons. And the ironic thing, and that was really the turning point, I would say, in my life, is because with that surrender, I got a glimpse of a new way of sort of living and thinking. Because when I returned to work months later, I couldn't help but notice that, you know, everything was going pretty well without all my help. You know, I wasn't important as I thought I was.
You found it worked as you got out of your own way, in other words.
I wasn't necessary like I thought I was. Uh-huh. And it was from there that I developed a way of working and doing business that involves a lot of relinquishing control. And then that spread to my personal life, too, where at home I was the major controller. I knew I was Father Knows Best, mm-hmm. definitely, with my children, my wives, and I didn't have much humility, even though I thought I did. And so it just changed the whole dynamic of my view of life and what would start working for me and did work for me.
Now, Danny, you take a look at control and what it is. This is a learned behavior, correct?
I believe it is. I mean, when you think about it, from the time we're a young child, who's the most controlling people we know?
Right.
Our parents.
Sure.
Right? I mean, yeah, they have their duties and responsibilities, but we're in a controlling environment. At school, we're in a controlling environment with our teachers. Even in churches and synagogues and mosques, there's an element of control. Certainly, politics are control. So we're surrounded by it. So we grow up thinking that's what we need to succeed and to be happy, and that's what we must and need to do. And we don't, for once, think or step back and see how that actually might be harming us.
I thought one of the most unique movies and actually book as well that kind of dealt with the ideal of the illusion of control was Jurassic Park.
Yeah, right.
You take a look at this, they're creating this island, no expense has been spared, so forth, and we deny these dinosaurs the DNA that would make them males and females. They're all females, and so then you have, of course, the role of the string theorist saying, well, look, life always finds a way, and it sounded like it did that with you.
Yes, life does find a way. And I find the more that we're able to go with the ups and downs and the ebbs and flow of life and sort of try to be as intuitive in interacting with life, the better things work out for us.
Now, when you take a look as people, again, as I talk about the beginning of the book, you used to live in the old area of Bel Air by, not too far from Sylvester Stallone, you're doing very well with what you're doing. And a lot of people would say, well, maybe being in control, really knowing what you want, going after it, being driven, doesn't seem like such a bad thing here. But some people really know how to manage that in such a way as they go after it, but then there's a way that you kind of let go at the same time. And so how did you go about being able to discover this? Because you really got pushed really toward the edge where you just about lost pretty much everything.
Right. Yeah, that's a really great question, because I want to make clear to the listeners, it's not that control is not important in our lives. Certainly, when you think about science, medicine, industry,
right,
supervising at work, things like that, control is very important. I try to distinguish between that type of control and what I call emotional control, driven control by our strong fears and angers and resentments. It's more that emotionally driven control that can be very harmful to us. And so, getting back to your question, it really comes down to finding the balance for each of us between control on the one hand and surrender on the other. And what I have found, and what I have learned, and what I have observed with those I've counseled is or maybe most of us are leaning toward that control part rather than surrender part. So we need to sort of find that balance, and it's sort of like, you got to try it, and that's what I suggest to my readers in my book and on my blog is, start giving up a little at a time. See how it works. In other words, you can have great success with even releasing, a little partial control. And what happens is you start seeing these results. They're often, unexpected, good things that can happen. That gives you a little confidence to go further, and to try more. And the bottom line, I think each of us have sort of an instinct for self-preservation that we're just not going to throw the cards down and, just walk away from life and just sort of say, hey, let everything happen as it does. I'm not.
I know there's a lot of passive hippies that have that idea.
I'm not suggesting any kind of laissez-faire. And,
sure.
And even today, there's definitely things where I have to exert my control. But what I try to do is I will stop and ask myself, am I doing this because of some fear?
Right.
Or out of some anger or some resentment? Because if it's that type of control-driven behavior, invariably that hurts me, as well as others. And then, as I write in my book and on my blog, I have these decontrol tools, so that I can sort of stop myself and I say, okay, I'm over-controlling now. What can I do to sort of diffuse that a bit? And then I can just use some of these tools to get back on track.
Now, tell us, the turning point where you finally, again, as I mentioned earlier, it seemed you had a lot of people look and go, boy, you really look like you just had it all working for you. And then it turns on a dime, and it seemed like things, just one thing after another, began to domino where it was kind of getting away from you. It was getting out of your hands. What was that moment for you where it turned, and what were the answers like as you were receiving them?
Well, I go back to these series of these wake-up calls, and then the last one having these major cancer surgeries. Mm-hmm. And I was brought to my knees. And I would say that's the turning point, where it was like a forced surrender. And what I try to tell people and write about is, you don't need to get to that point. I hope you don't need to get to that point where you can start to see, start surrendering a little bit more before you get to that point. And once I sort of turned the corner, so to speak, my whole life opened up. Daniel, I could never draw as a kid. I was one of the worst drawers. I took up painting. I had a painting lesson, and within a year I was turning out oil paintings that even today it's hard. I look at them and I say, boy, I did those, and it had to do with releasing and relaxing
right.
and giving up control. And by the way, just to tout it a little bit, on my website, www.losing control, finding serenity, I have some of my artwork up there, as well as poetry. I started writing poetry, and I never thought of myself as a poet. I started having poetry published. I went back to playing tennis, something I had done in high school, and I started winning some seniors tournaments. My life with my children just totally changed. I was a very dominating parent, very fearful parent, and through these ways of being willing to give up a little control, my bond with my children just improved so much,
mm-hmm.
So it sort of affected every part of my life. It started at work because I wasn't at work during this period of my illness, but it started with seeing that, okay, maybe I need to listen to others a little more. Maybe I have to realize that my way is not always the best way for people, maybe for me, but not for others. And, in other words, just being a little bit more open-minded, and then finding constructive ways to deal with my fears. Once I started doing all these different things, it's sort of what I call freed life's currents. In other words, mm-hmm. I believe that life has the ebb and flow, and it has these currents that when we try to resist them, it usually brings harm to us. I use the example of a conveyor belt. When we're over-controlling, we're trying to grip life, we're trying to hold on to life too strong, and it's sort of like if you try to grip a rapidly moving conveyor belt, you're either going to get burned or you're going to get dragged along.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the same thing with control in life. So, I try to loosen the reins a
mm-hmm.
little bit.
Mm-hmm. Now, Danny, you bring up an excellent point that I was about to bring up, and that is about parenting. Gee whiz, here is this area. A lot of us, we tend to parent mainly in many ways that our parents had parented us, and it sounds like that was probably the way it was for you in
yes.
some ways, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And so you begin to do the same thing, and it's just almost unconscious. It's just automatic.
It's amazingly automatic.
And I guess the really neat thing for me is that as I began to parent my own children, I did it much as my mother did for me. And what was interesting about that is I felt like she listened. I felt like she not only listened, but she would allow me just to kind of go and do what I would do, make my mistakes and have my successes. And if there was ever really any advice to come from her, it always came in the form of stories. Maybe some of them involved her in the story. Maybe most of them, though, however, usually involved someone she knew or something she had heard about. And I found this to be excellent because as I was with my own children, for instance, let's say my oldest daughter would say, Dad, this happened to me at school today. We might be sitting and having ice cream somewhere, and she would just go on and on and on, what do I think I should do? And I would say, well, what do you think you should do? And it's really amazing that children, and even moving into teens, really have the capacity to really make good choices. Maybe some of them you may not think are so good, and maybe they're not. But when you're as a controller trying to raise children, I'm sure there were times you must have not only just pulled your hair out of your head, but you said to yourself, how do I get you to do anything?
Yeah. Daniel, your mother was ahead of her times. Wise lady.
That's what dropping out of high school to have a child at 16 can do for you.
Oh, wow, my goodness.
Yeah,
but the way she was with you and the way you just described you are with your daughter is wonderful. It took me a long time to learn that. In fact, what I write about, I call it the fundamental parental challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And on the one hand, we have the responsibility of parents to instilling good values and ethics and manners and instilling a sense of
because we want the best for our child.
We want that. But
There's no doubt.
But then it's that versus where we become domineering in their lives, or too domineering, and we don't allow them to make their own mistakes. We don't allow them to process things themselves, and that type of control, this domineering type of parental control, really, I feel, harms our children. It stunts their growth. It doesn't allow them the wisdom of their mistakes or the sense of independence and self-reliance they can get. And so the question you put back to your daughter was just wonderful. In fact, it reminds me when my daughter, now 14, at 6th grade, they had a little graduation service, and she spoke, and she read this famous quote from Khalil Gibran, where it says, our children come through us, but they're not us.
Right.
and she did her own little take on that, and she ended up saying, parents, trust us. That's the word she used. Trust us that we can make the best choices for ourselves.
Well, sure.
Here's a 6th grader, and she's been my learning tree, my sense of wisdom, and certainly puts me in my place when I get too controlling with her. So it's so tough for parents, but the more that we can trust our children, the more that we can realize and accept that they are not us. They may have certain parts of us, but they are not us. They process things differently than we do. They may think differently than we do. And the more humble we can be with them and more trusting we can be with them, allows them to blossom, Mm-hmm. And the other thing is I find later on when they get out of school and go on their own, I think they're better equipped,
mm-hmm.
Especially in these days, in these difficult times where, it's all the different articles, even college graduates aren't able to get jobs or have trouble or going back living at home. These are very difficult times, but I sort of feel those children that have already been geared towards relying on themselves are going to do a lot better in this environment.
Hmm. And the other thing, too, is when it comes to parenting that we tend to, we, as you had mentioned, we want the best for our children. We also want to be sure that they're safe, especially in a day and an age where, there's just a lot of fears in parents, especially broadcast through the media. This is going on in your neighborhood, and I remember there was a time remembering how my own mother was about sharing the possibility of danger. And one of those ways that I did even with my own children is there was a time that it was after school, and we were just kind of sitting there, having a little snack somewhere. And I always was in this habit of getting them after school. We'd go somewhere. So I could sit and listen to their day pretty much and, know what was going on. And then that was the other thing is learning to listen. But in this particular instance, I just kind of had one of those feigned looks like just something was really on my mind. And I was just waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, they took the bait. They said, hey, Dad, what's really wrong? You look like, there's something wrong or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they were, pretty young, probably, third and fourth grade. And I said, well, I guess I just don't know how to handle how I'm feeling right now. And they were, well, about what? And I said, well, a friend of mine right now, they're trying to find their youngest son. And apparently, as he was out playing, a pickup truck came by with someone in it who was actually looking for their lost dog and wondered whether or not he might be willing to join him to find this lost dog, and they're still looking for their son. Wow. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
And there was, one of those things going on where somebody comes along and, what child doesn't want to help a stranger find their lost animal?
Sure.
But the fact, that you put that, now the story really wasn't true for the most part, but it's possible that it could be true.
Yes.
But you see how that instills, instead of saying, don't go riding with strangers, which a child most of the time can't really fathom what that means to, geez, I don't want to be lost from you. There's a whole different thing. But now you're also a father of a son, as I understand.
Yes, I am.
Now, that there, father and son and control issues, that must have been huge for you.
Oh, yeah, with my father particularly. He was just, a major controller. But and as what you said at the beginning of the show is that, we have that tendency of parenting similar to the way we were parented. And
right.
with my son, up until his teen years, it was like I was always advising him, telling him what he should do, what was best for him. And then what happened was sort of interesting. At one point, he said, I can do it, Dad. He became very dismissive of me. He didn't want to listen to me anymore.
Right.
And as a controller, that was really hard for me to take. I had to step back, but I learned. I realized that any time I would suggest or give advice or anything like that, it just fell on deaf ears. In fact, it hurt our bond, But what happened was, years later, when he was into his career, because I had stopped doing that, he would then come to me on his own and say, Papa, he called me Papa. He says, Papa, I wanted to ask you something, to get your advice on something that happened here or happened there. And so it's really sort of neat. It was only until after I gave up trying to control or advise that I got the thing I was sort of wanted to do all along, and we became much closer. And even to this day, he's 36 now, and he's his own man. And at times, at his choosing, he'll come and maybe ask me what I think about something. But even then, what I've learned, Daniel, is only to respond to what he's asking, not to take it any further.
Right.
Because your tendency is you want to keep going with it, and boy, once that happens, you get shut off again. So,
yeah, the idea for parents, the need to lecture is not much of a need really at all.
yeah, I think parents, I thought about it. I was thinking that maybe parents need to be needed by their children, and I think there's that feeling in us. We want to be needed by our children, so there's that natural response, But, as I say and as I write about, we need to know when not to go further. We need to, like you say, to trust our children can make the best decisions for themselves, and to, in that sense, to be someone that they can turn to if they want to,
Mm-hmm. Because the truth is, most of the consequences they put themselves into are pretty manageable for themselves, and they realize, well, I don't think that's the outcome I was looking for. Maybe there's a different way to do it versus, well, that was exactly what I wanted. So, you're either moving away from what you don't want or toward what you want. And that was pretty much how I was with my children. Is I said, you're going to make choices in your life. What you have to ask yourself after whatever choice you've made has been made, do you like what you're getting? It was just that simple for me. And I remember as I was sharing that with them one day on a particular situation where it had to do with the law, and I said, it was just one of those things I threw out there. I said, if I gave you $500 right now, what would you do with it? And so they were spouting off their answers, and it was really quite amazing. And this is one of those things that God kind of throws at you, the sign saying, okay, I'm going to enhance what you're actually sharing here. But this was really interesting how this worked out, driving down the highway. And so as they started finishing up, and I said, well, I wished I could have done that with the $500 that I had. And then I paused, and then, of course, I said, what do you mean that you had? And I said, well, the law has decided how they want to spend $500 that I had. And I said, this is what went on and had to do with a traffic violation. And I said, you really want to pay attention out there. I had made a choice. I knew better, and the law decided to let me have it. And so they took $500 away from me. They took that choice that you just had with the $500 away from me. And I said, sometimes we make good choices, and sometimes the choices are bad, but they're only bad because of how they make you feel and do they move you toward where you want to go.
Right.
Just as I finished that, a police car was driving by me with somebody in the back, and I said, look at that. Somebody sitting back in the back of the police car. What do you think about his choices?
Wow.
They said, well, it looks like he made a bad choice.
Wow. Yeah, I like the way you tell the stories, is just to make a point, and but you're right. We could try to tell them what might be better for them, but
right.
until they feel the pain of making maybe an incorrect decision, they're not going to look for better ways to do things, you know, and that's I think that's so important, especially, you know, when they're younger, you know, that things aren't so much at stake, you know, versus, you know, making those serious mistakes later in their lives, you know.
Sure.
Let them learn earlier, you know. It's the same thing, and I have a story in my book of, you know, about the mother. The child comes home from school and, what'd you get, Johnny, what'd you get on the test today? And C+, and then she goes bananas, you know. And because all of her fears about, you know, whether Johnny's going to do well in school, whether he's going to get into college, and whether he'll graduate from college and get a good job, you know, all that fear starts where she reacts so strongly toward Johnny, so to speak. And what I ask is to someone like this is, you know, how many people do you know that didn't go to college that are pretty successful and happy in life? You know, so, you know, I go through this worst case scenario exercises a lot in Losing Control, Finding Serenity, because I think those are so important to give us the perspective we need. You know, especially with what I think you said earlier, our fears are so illusory, you know. They're more illusory than real, but they feel so real, and until we confront and address those fears for what they are, we're not going to have that perspective, and they're really going to stymie us, you know. And say parental fears, fears with our relationships, you know, fears at work fears, even creative fears in our creative endeavors. And I keep coming back to that because fear is such a primary cause of this unhealthy form of controlling behavior that we have.
Now, Danny, we've talked about losing control or trying to have control when it comes to parenting. Now, here's a big one, and I know you really must have dealt with relationships on this level when it came to the world of business. And, you know, I say there is no greater lesson at times, besides marriage and the management of money, to learn what those demons are that you have inside of yourself when you start your own business and you take on people who work in your business. And there was nothing I couldn't stand more than a controlling boss who never really had the foresight to tell me about the outcomes they were looking for. And so I was always doing something wrong, to the point I said, you know, you've got this all figured out. I'm going somewhere else. Yeah. But there's an area there that's really difficult for a lot of people when they start their own businesses and they have people coming to work for them. That control stuff gets big.
It sure does. It sure does. Are you talking now? We talk from the point of view of the employee working for the controlling boss?
Well, no, that's already a given. You know, it's either going to be a good relationship where the employee is driven to say, I want to be successful not just for myself, but for you in the business, or I don't give a dadgum about this, I'm moving on. I'm talking from the perspective of somebody who actually has people working in their business. Because, you know, employers, especially self-employed people, that's really where I want to come from the point at first. You know, when they start a business, you know, they think they know about everything. Yeah. But we all really know, anybody who's ever started a business, you really know a lot less than you thought you did.
Yeah, and again, okay, I understand. When you were starting early, and I did, I was always a sort of a sole owner, so to speak.
Sure.
Even as a lawyer, and when I went into real estate, I was more of a sole practitioner. And I think one of those reasons, quite honestly, because I had control, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't have to have partners or anything. I could call the shots. But again, I think there's a lot of fear of making a mistake, the wanting to be a perfectionist, feeling that everything had to be done just so and had to be done in this way, or it wasn't going to work, you know. So all that is really just sort of, I know it was all within me, and so I was so driven, and the consequence of that, one of the consequences of it, is our own internal sense of well-being. We have no sense of peace, calm, or as I say in my book, serenity, you know, and it's hard to sleep at night and all this stuff. I relate to all that. I understand all that. And I would still be doing that had I not had these wake-up calls, because when I had the wake-up call, when I started giving up some control at work and started going with the ebbs and flows of work, and started seeing, there were times that it was best to assert myself and my input, and there were times just to let things go. What I found, Daniel, in dealing with these sort of complex business issues where you don't quite know what to do, because there's a lot of different people involved or a lot of different issues involved, I step back now. I step back and let it evolve. Let it evolve. And what invariably happens, there comes a point where instinctively I feel, okay, now's the time for me to step in or to assert myself or to suggest something, rather than trying to push it along too forcibly. And you sort of try to get into this ebb and flow of the workforce, so to speak. And what happens is, first of all, I don't have to work as hard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't have to worry as much, but my decisions are more sound, and it allows paths and opportunities to open up that would never have been there before. Let me give you just.
And you would have never seen them before, too.
Let me give you an example of what happened. I have office buildings, and there's one in Utah, and I had a leasing agent for another company go and put his sign right on our property. And I had known this guy for 20 years. And I say, Niels, what are you doing? I was so upset because we never allowed other agents to do that other than our own sign, right? He was doing it to try to sublet space for one of his clients that was in our building. My first reaction was, call my lawyer. I was going to stick the legal hounds on him, But by then, I had known enough that, wait a second, Danny, step back, pause, think it through. And what is the harm? Okay, what is the harm? The harm was to my ego, was to my personal feelings that he didn't come and talk to me. Okay?
Right.
I then decided, you know what? I'm just going to let him keep his sign there. And so, so I gave up control of that situation. You know what happened, Daniel? About a week later, someone came, called off his sign, went and looked at the space that he had for sublease in our building, didn't like that space, but looked at some of our space and leased some of our space. Okay? That would have never have happened had not this person's sign been out in front of our property. And that's the type of thing that I find invariably happens when I'm willing to loosen the reins at work.
Right.
It allows these unknown paths to open up. And then the other thing, what I talk about, when we're control driven, it's like we have these blinders that we can't see really what's many times before our eyes. We're so intense in a way we are. So when you take these blinders off by giving up a little control, our vision expands.
Mm-hmm.
It really expands. And the example I like to give is, you ever lost your keys and you're looking all around for your keys, right?
Sure.
Or glasses, and then you finally give up, and about 20 seconds later that you see them. That happens all the time. And I think it's because that intensity is stopped, and we are more clear. We can see more clearly. And I think that's the same at work, same at business. I think it's the same in life. And that's why, I write a lot about those type of things. If I can push my blog just for a moment, but Danny's Decontrol Yourself blog can be found at my website, Losing Control, Finding Serenity, in which I have, stories. I share a lot of different stories on these things.
Fascinating stuff. It's such a great subject because we realize as we learn what it means. It's not so much of letting go of control in as much as we begin to allow. And that's what it sounds like was happening with you, that you started allowing things to unfold naturally. In fact, what you have here on your blog is you have 3 keys or benefits of letting go of success. And one of the key ones that really popped out, and it sounded like you were just kind of going in this direction, but I want to let the listeners know about this. Letting go of control expands your creative horizons. And it's really, with the story that you're talking about there, that is so true that if we just get out of our own way sometimes, just say, okay, this is my intention, or this is what my desire is. It isn't about controlling the things that are within your control. Like, you still want to get up every day. There are things that need to be done. There's no doubt about that. But forcing the issue can sometimes give you less than what you really wanted. And I'm sure that you found that to be pretty true for yourself.
Oh, sure. And you talk about the creative realm, as you say, is when I started painting, it was such an amazing thing to me because I tapped into something that was sort of the opposite of the way I was, So in the arts, whatever the endeavor is, I find that try not to analyze too much, try not to think about it too much. Just as you say, allow and trust that whatever's going to come out is that part of you, and just sort of go with that part of you. And it's well put when you say it's a matter of allowing. It's a matter of stepping back and allowing things to proceed in their natural, normal course.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we can do that, what I find then, I find that our intuition is stronger, and so we can sort of engage things more intuitively and more trustfully, and that just it keeps expanding, and to where it can go, it's open, it's totally open where you can end up. In my case, I've been blessed, I still work, probably half the time I did, making just as much money.
Mm-hmm.
That allows me to really pursue my passions, which is art. Now, my passion, quite honestly, now I love blogging. I'm not a techie. I'm too old to be a techie, but I love learning. And through my blog, just learning even the technical aspects of things, and I'm having fun with it, as long as I don't take myself too seriously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know it's really fascinating to think about the two things that we were giving is the ability to learn, to learn new things and to grow, and then the second thing is that we were created to be co-creators. Now, those are two extremely wonderfully powerful elements we've all been bestowed with. Yes. But then, when you get to a point when you try to control the outcomes of that, you really don't enjoy what really happens as these things unfold. And it sounds like you've come to a place in Serenity, as the part of the title of your book, Losing Control, Finding Serenity, that, as you said, life just got easier. And I guess we could both say to our listeners, if life got easier for you, would that be okay?
Wouldn't that be wonderful? Yeah, it's blessed. It's blessed. I have a little sticker on my computer. I'm looking at it now. Be aware of the beauty all around me. Mm-hmm. And I can't be aware unless I'm not in the moment. Mm-hmm. And when I allow, I'm certainly more in the moment.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking earlier, Danny, as you were talking about how we tend to control because there's that worst-case scenario we're trying to avoid or prevent. And I just couldn't help but think about Mark Twain, who says, the worst things in life haven't happened yet.
That's great.
Now, Danny, if you could, please give out your website and tell us a little bit about your blog and whatnot.
Yeah, it's www.losingcontrolfindingserenity.com, and I have, as you mentioned, I have articles that I've written there. I have my paintings and some of the poetry and information about the book. And by the way, I do have an e-book version of that I've actually priced at $3.99. I want people to be able to freely, or as least expensively can, read it and hopefully benefit by the book. And then from that website, you can go to Danny's Decontrol Yourself blog, where I have different posts on a lot of the things we've been talking about, but stories about losing control in different parts of our lives and the benefits from that. And that could be either at that website or blog.losingcontrolfindingserenity. So, as I say, I'm enjoying it. I invite the listeners to read a lot what I have on there, and hopefully they can, as I say, benefit from that.
Well, I'm sure they will, especially when you consider how timely this particular show is. Day before Thanksgiving, listeners, talk about control issues that are going to pop up when it comes to preparing the Thanksgiving party.
Right. And the holidays, man.
And the holidays.
When we come to the holidays, all these control issues with our family. And in fact, I had a post last December. I think I'm going to repeat it. Is giving up control during the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
They can be difficult times, but the more that we can sort of again step back and allow and trust, trust that we will be able to take care of ourselves. Be willing to try to accept life as it is, the best that we can, and that we'll be okay within that. Certainly during the holidays, and of course to be grateful for all the many blessings that we have. And this has certainly been a blessed year for me.
Well, I'm sure that it has. And as I'm looking at the website, listeners, here we have Danny walking on the beach, and you see the surf tumbling in behind him. And I'm thinking, I think your next step is to take up surfing.
There you go.
If there's ever a place you're going to learn to gain control and lose control all at the same time, surfing is it.
Yes.
Okay, your website again.
www.losingcontrolfindingserenity.com.
Very good. Mr. Danny Miller, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program, and enjoy your Thanksgiving as well as your holidays as well.
I enjoy your questions are great. Enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
We also want to thank you, the listeners out there, for taking and exercising the control to tune in and listen to the Beyond 50 radio program. Use that same motivation to type in the words beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you again for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. Remember, live your day past halfway.